Behind the ordinary objects that surround us in our everyday lives lies something extraordinary. Incredible stories of ingenious solutions to problems most of us never knew existed. So what mysteries are concealed in everyday things we take for granted? Icebreakers, money, bowling alleys. Behind the ordinary is the extraordinary. Now revealed as we go behind the scenes, inside the machines, to find out, how do they do it? It's the middle of winter in eastern Canada. It doesn't look it, but this mesmerizing frozen landscape is a river. The mighty St. Lawrence, one of the most vital trade routes in North America. But if the river's frozen, there's no trade. So how do you keep the shipping lanes open on the St. Lawrence River in near Arctic conditions? How do they do it? There's a very special ship on the St. Lawrence which is prepared to sail where no other ship dares. This is the Amundsen. This dauntless vessel has the task of forging a path through ice sheets which are as much as 2 meters thick. Ice like this would sink a weaker ship, but the Amundsen is an icebreaker, specially designed to smash through the St. Lawrence's frozen surface. What the Amundsen does is immensely important. The St. Lawrence River is over 1,600 kilometers long. A quarter of the entire population of North America depend on it, as they're linked to the sea. In order to keep it flowing, the river is constantly charted for dangerous ice conditions. As the Amundsen surveys the St. Lawrence from sea level, a reconnaissance helicopter gathers information on the icy waters from above. The helicopter communicates its findings to a control room in Quebec City. This is the Canadian Coast Guard Control Centre, a maritime version of air traffic control. The Coast Guards monitor every vessel within their jurisdiction along almost 6,500 kilometers of coastline. It's the job of ice specialists like Jean-Yves Roy to interpret the data and spot potentially hazardous situations.
Okay, right now on the screen here, we have an ice chart that is produced by the helicopter, and they draw the ice conditions. Plus we have here, we have our cameras here that look at different places. As you can see here, the ice is moving everywhere, so we don't want the ice to stop anywhere.
But even for the Amundsen, sailing straight into blocks of ice is perilous. It is vital that the crew finds the best route through. So how do they do it? While all ice may appear the same to you and me, a trained eye can recognize important differences.
As far as the ice is concerned, the first part of our trip will get us to light ice, very kind of thin, and then going to have some gray ice, which is a little thicker.
Experience and a trained eye is often not enough. When the going gets tough, the only answer is to stop the icebreaker and for the ice specialist to go overboard. His job is to gather data on the thickness of the ice, and the only way he can do it is by digging around. By boring a hole into the ice and measuring its depth, the Amundsen can avoid the more solid areas and carve out an easier path elsewhere. The data collected in the field is sent back to the Coast Guard Control Centre, where all the Amundsen's movements are monitored. Today, the Amundsen has the job of ploughing a path through the frozen river to enable the 39,000-ton Croatian bulk carrier, the city of Dubrovnik, to enter port in Quebec. The ice which the Amundsen breaks reforms with incredible speed in this freezing cold water, so for safety's sake, the trailing ship must remain close to the Amundsen. But this brings its own danger.
If we have a major mechanical problem, we have very, very few seconds to react, and it's the same thing for the other ships. So there's always the fear that something goes bad, and then we get rammed over by the other vessels. So that's something it's something we don't like to think about, but it's kind of a nightmare.
The city of Dubrovnik, on the last leg of its journey from sunny Brazil, silently trails the Amundsen through the ice. Captain Alain endeavours to keep the bulk carrier as close as possible without endangering his own, much smaller ship.
What I'm doing is adjusting the ship speed to maintain the same distance between our ship and the ship we're escorting. This is the target you see right here on the screen. So I'm trying to keep the same distance. Actually, I'm going to let it just come a little closer to here, then maintain that distance all the time.
As the ships arrive in Port Alfred, the Amundsen's final task is to break the surface in the icy port for the Croatian vessel to dock. The Amundsen's job for today is done. Money. Across the world, 100 billion banknotes are produced every year and spent many times over. The total value of notes in circulation is more than $1 trillion. That's $1,000 million. But the trouble with all this money is, it doesn't last long. The life expectancy of a banknote is just over a year. And worse than that, many banknotes are still relatively easy to forge. So how do you create an almost indestructible banknote which is all but impossible to forge? How do they do it? Welcome to Melbourne, Australia, where dirty money is a thing of the past. Faced with the twin challenges of banknotes rapidly wearing out and increasingly sophisticated methods of forgery, the Reserve Bank of Australia decided on a radical break with tradition. In 1988, they started to experiment with a bold new kind of banknote, one that was virtually indestructible, a banknote which was made of plastic. And it's such a success, it's catching on all over the world, from New Zealand to Nepal. To make their plastic money, the Australians start with these small granules of polymer. The tiny beads are melted at the top of this huge metal tube. And what you can see here is the molten polymer cascading down. As the 250-degree liquid travels, it is cooled by small jets of water. Now it's ready for the next stage in the process. And if you've ever blown bubbles, prepare to be amazed. This is one of the biggest bubbles on Earth, 5 stories high. It's so big, in fact, it's impossible to see it all at once. This is just the top. As long as it's maintained at the correct pressure, the walls of the bubble are always the same thickness. But it needs constant monitoring. In total, this huge bubble will be stretched 20 meters. Towards the bottom of the bubble, the polymer is gathered up in rolls, and it starts to resemble cling film. An infrared gauge checks that the film has the correct thickness. The polymer sheets are wrapped into rolls. Each roll contains over 8 kilometers of film and weighs 1.5 tons. Now they've created the polymer film, there's another problem. How do you print onto clear plastic so the ink doesn't rub off? The solution requires a massive press and some seriously gloopy paint. The film is painted white up to 5 times on each side, creating an opaque, adhesive surface that's ready to receive the banknote design. It may look like they've missed a bit, but in fact every note will have a small transparent window. A strobe light is used to check that the windows are all there. This is one of the most important characteristics of the plastic banknote, because this is where one of the key security features will go. The rolls of notes are sent up one level, and it's here that a counterfeit-proof image is burned into the window. A technician carefully monitors the process as a laser etches 5 tiny images into each window in 20 billionths of a second.
This pattern is a diffractive optic, which is very similar to a hologram, except in that you can project this with a laser pointer, or you can look through it at a point source light. Very, very sort of high-tech security feature. It's very, very difficult to counterfeit. In fact, we're not aware of anybody having done it as yet.
Now the polymer can be cut into sheets. They're almost ready for the next stage, the printing of the banknote design. Designing a banknote demands a very special kind of artistic skill. These designers have many decades of experience, and yet you can buy one of their drawings for just $1. Images are carefully chosen, not just for their aesthetic appeal, but also to deter counterfeiters. And this means they're packed with fine detail. A single banknote may take more than 2 years from initial design idea to entering circulation. Once the design is ready, it can go onto the polymer sheets. But this has to be done in 2 stages. First, the background colors are added by this special machine, which prints on both sides of the note simultaneously. Then the notes need to be transferred to a second machine for their next layer of ink. The worker fans out the sheets to ensure they don't stick together. In his hands, he's holding what will become almost $750,000. The next printing press adds another layer of ink, the bolder colors and fine details. By varying the thickness of the ink, it gives the surface of the note a ridged texture that should make it easy to distinguish the real thing from a forgery. The notes are almost finished, but they still lack one key security feature: their unique serial numbers. The counter is set by hand to the first number of the next sequence, and the machine is ready to start numbering the notes. It can number 2.5 million notes in one 8-hour shift. And the printed banknotes can be cut to size, 500 sheets at a time. They look finished, but these banknotes aren't going anywhere just yet. Every single note must be checked to make sure it is perfect. Now this job is done by machine, but it used to be performed by a team of 70 women. Women were chosen because it was thought they had a keener eye for detail. Even today, it's a woman who checks a random sample of notes just to make sure the checking machine itself doesn't make a mistake. A few kilometers away on the local beach, there's bound to be one absent-minded swimmer who's left his money in his pocket. But in Australia, it doesn't matter. For this beach bum, his dripping loot will be just as acceptable to the local bartender as before he went into the water. Bowling hasn't always been played at such breakneck speed. The Sheephead pub in Edinburgh built its 10-pin bowling alley in 1871, and the game has been played the same way here ever since. This version is much closer to the centuries-old match of Skittles. The balls don't have holes for your fingers, but otherwise the equipment looks pretty much the same as 10-pin bowling today. But the pace is very different because there's a person, not a machine, respotting the pins at the other end. But hey, these guys are in no hurry.
You end up with a very strong right arm from lifting the beer and lifting the ball.
So how do you create an alley which can reset its own pins in a matter of seconds? To find out, we've come to the AMF Kubica factory in Virginia, USA, where they make the machines known as pin spotters. They've been making them since 1945, and demand is huge from all around the world. 11 are made by hand here every day from 4,000 individual component parts. The pin spotter's job is to ensure that the knocked over pins are removed and a new set of pins is ready for the next throw in 8.5 seconds. These pin spotters live in a parallel universe, hidden from public view at the back of the alleys. But how do they work? Every pin that's knocked down is swept off to a carousel at the back and positioned the right way up. Next, they're fed onto a plastic tray, but they need to be distributed into their proper positions. These pins are then respotted. Only one of the 10 pins can fit into one of the holes. But how does the arm know where to put each pin? The answer is with the irregular-shaped rail on this white plastic wheel. There are 10 notches on the wheel which direct the pin distribution arm. As the wheel revolves, the mechanism repositions the arm so that each of the 10 pins ends up in its correct space. The engineers know that the spotter should be able to reset at least 6,000 pins before it needs any maintenance. But when it does jam, it needs a human called a pin chaser to sort it out. The machines are generally so reliable, though, that he can look after 24 lanes at the same time. So now you know what happens with the pins. What about the ball? It too disappears into an unseen world where it finds its way to a hole down the side and is then propelled under the lane back to the bowling area. A bowling ball can weigh up to 16 pounds and is usually made of plastic. These sample balls are stringently tested in the factory. A ball will typically play a punishing 50 games a day and should last at least 5 years. The test ball will pass through this loop-the-loop machine 4 million times.
This machine runs 24/7. It's non-stop. The only thing that really stops this machine here is a power failure.
This is literally a job for a ball breaker.
My job is to break things, and that's basically what I do. I put it to the test and see what does it take to break it and what does it take to make this part fail.
You'd think they'd be bowled out, but believe it or not, this is how the workers at AMF choose to relax.
It's free, why not?
So next time you're out at the bowling alley, spend spare a thought for the pin spotter and the pin chasers working feverishly behind the scenes. Behind the ordinary things that surround us in our daily lives are miraculous advances in engineering, which we rarely get to see. Ingenious solutions to problems most of us never knew existed. Since this program began, the Amundsen has smashed through another 72,000 tons of ice. $750,000 worth of plastic banknotes have been produced, and 100 pins have been repositioned perfectly in one bowling lane. Even the most ordinary objects have an extraordinary story to tell. We only have to watch and listen.
接下来，为了表演惊险特技而设计的机器怪兽，他们将毫不留情地摧毁一切障碍。超猛机器王接着播出。
Behind the ordinary objects that surround us in our everyday lives lies something extraordinary. Incredible stories of ingenious solutions to problems most of us never knew existed. So what mysteries are concealed in everyday things we take for granted? Mining trucks, flat pack furniture, air traffic control. Behind the ordinary is the extraordinary, now revealed as we go behind the scenes inside the machines to find out how do they do it. Australia, and the largest coal mine in the world. It's a monster of a mine, with a fleet of record-breaking monster mining trucks. This machine is simply enormous. The dumper alone is 7 meters high and can hold a weight equivalent to 600 cars. Just to get in and out, you have to climb 2 long flights of stairs. Each of its tires is a staggering 3.5 meters high, and in the unlikely event that you get a puncture, a new one will set you back $30,000. This is the undisputed heavyweight truck champion of the world. But how do they design and build the world's biggest dump truck? How do they do it? They begin with the chassis, using steel up to 15 centimeters thick. A plasma arc cutter eats its way into the metal to create the panels. Next, they have to be shaped. The presses here are phenomenally powerful, using as much as 500 tons of force to bend some pieces. Once complete, these metal elements are welded to create the chassis. The stresses on the metalwork and welds of these trucks are huge. Any flaw could be catastrophic. So it's time for a checkup from the doctor. He spreads jelly on the truck and then he uses an ultrasound to inspect every weld in the chassis. The ultrasound sends a sound wave through the joint to produce echoes, which can precisely identify any flaws, however minute, in the metalwork.
This particular part is one of the most critical parts on the truck. The dump hoist pivot mounts to the ends, and that's what raises and lowers the bed of the truck. several thousand times during the life of the truck.
Once checked, the chassis heads off for the next stage of production. It weighs 30 tons, so transporting it across the factory floor and turning it over is itself a potentially hazardous operation. Maneuvering a load like this takes teamwork, and over the noise of the cranes, the guys here have developed their own sign language. At the other end of the factory floor, they're building the engine. And of course, for the world's biggest truck, you need one of the world's biggest engines. This gigantic motor is a 3,650 horsepower, 90-litre, 20-cylinder diesel engine. The engine alone weighs over 5 tons. It's bigger than a small bus, and to build it costs $500,000. And running it isn't cheap. It does a pathetic 4 miles to the gallon. That's why you need a 1,250-gallon fuel tank. So, no good for the school run. Back in Australia, an army of 20 of these monsters is at work every day at Mount Arthur. Each one costs more than $3 million, so that's more than $60 million worth of dumper trucks.
I think it's a great job. I've been here about 10.5 years. I have other skills, but I prefer to drive one of these trucks.
From a distance, these trucks look big. But once you get up close, their giant scale is truly awesome. And then it hits you. These monster trucks really are unlike any other on Earth. This warehouse is enormous. It's 8 stories high and covers an area the size of 60 football pitches. Each year, the forklifts here travel the equivalent of once around the world. But this warehouse is a pokey back bedroom compared to this warehouse. It's almost 1 kilometre long and an astonishing 23 stories high. This is one almighty mother of a warehouse. It's one of the biggest in the world, and all there is inside it is flat pack furniture. Every year, more than 400 million of us visit IKEA's 250 stores around the world and spend almost £10 billion on its flat-pack furniture. We read 140 million store catalogues, consume over 112 million of their meatballs, and relax in their beds, where 10% of all Europeans are conceived. You might think that a business that big would need a phenomenal warehouse, and you'd be right. So how does a piece of flat-pack furniture make its way from initial design to your spare bedroom? How do they do it? The company was founded by Ingvar Kamprad over 50 years ago. When he couldn't fit this table into his car, he cut the legs off and flat-pack furniture was born. And the place it all began was here, the small town of Älmhult in the middle of Sweden. This town is still the heart of IKEA. The company started in this extraordinarily small garden shed. Today it needs somewhere a bit bigger. Everywhere you look in Älmhult, it's IKEA. There's this massive store, the large development factory, the sizable prototype testing labs, and the gigantic distribution centres. The secret of their success starts with the design of their furniture.
Well, creating the lowest price through design really is about being a little bit more clever in every choice you're making. And that, of course, demands a lot of creativity. It's not everyone who can do an IKEA product, so you have to be a little bit better.
One of their latest models is this, the Elan chair. The problem facing the designers is how to make sturdy, good-looking furniture which can be mass-produced, flat-packed and easily assembled. It starts, as always, on a computer. Designers can't go off on a flight of fancy. This furniture needs to be dead simple. It should be possible to produce it quickly and cheaply. Just as important as the look, it has to be easy to transport and assemble. So complicated fixtures and fittings are thrown out right away. Then they make a prototype. The craftsmen at the construction centre make one for every single item of furniture. Once built, the prototype chair is sent to the test centre. Here they see how much pressure it can withstand before tipping over, how often it can be sat upon without the joints breaking, and how it'll cope with being knocked over. If it passes, it'll be sent to this factory to be mass-produced. As well as being a new shape, these chairs are also made from a new kind of material. These blue plastic and recycled sawdust pellets are baked together to form the finished article. Flat-pack furniture is meant to be assembled by the customer. But how many times have you found yourself wrestling helplessly with a would-be garden shed and a sheet of instructions written in Japanese? So we challenged the project manager to put her own chair together. Okay, so she succeeded, but we had to speed her up. Now they've got to get their new chair into a flat pack. Just about every item of IKEA furniture is flat packed, but how do they manage to flat pack countless millions of items of such different shapes and sizes quickly and economically? The answer lies inside this factory, with some of the cleverest robots around. Before these robots arrived, all their flat packing was done by hand, with each human packing about 20 items an hour. These robots handle any shape and size of item and flat pack 720 an hour. And they work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And once the packing is complete, the flat packs are sent to the distribution centres at Almholt, ready to be shipped around the world. Flat packing is essential to keeping prices down. It means warehouse space and container space is used to the maximum. So there's money saved in storage and transportation. But there's also money saved from economies of scale. And when it comes to scale, here they like to think big. When they decide to make a new design of chair, they don't just make one or two, they make hundreds of thousands. And even when this furniture is neatly flat-packed by robots, all those flat packs need to be stored. On how do they do it, we like to think we bring you some amazing stories. We like to show you the tallest this and the longest that, but sometimes it's just too hard to describe in words. So we thought you needed to see for yourself how big this warehouse is. You may remember the end of that Indiana Jones film where the Lost Ark gets filed away under the magical artifacts section of some humongous government warehouse. Well, take it from us. This one's bigger. Just to remind you, each aisle is 1 kilometre long and a mind-blowing 23 stories high. And if there's something high up you can't reach, you'd better ask for help. Now, where did we put that ancient holy relic? The flat packs are finally shipped to one of the 250 stores worldwide. And that helps make the company's founder one of the richest men in the world. Not bad for someone who started life by hacking the legs off his own table. The skies are becoming increasingly crowded. At any one time, 250,000 airline passengers are in the air. That's equal to the population of Iceland. And the number of passengers and planes flying is set to grow by 1/3 over the next 5 years. All of which means airports and runways are becoming more and more congested. The biggest challenge comes when these planes are trying to take off and land. So how do air traffic controllers keep planes moving quickly, safely, and on schedule? How do they do it? Hong Kong, one of the busiest ports in the world, and now Hong Kong Airport, again one of the busiest. Every day, an average 1,250 aircraft take off and land here, making it the 5th busiest airport in the world. And every single plane arriving and departing is handled by a team of 250 air traffic controllers. It's a job that requires a remarkable degree of skill and incredible attention to detail, because at any one time they could be handling up to 12 aircraft.
We have to ensure that all aircraft are well separated according to the regulations, because even though it's like a chessboard, there are hundreds of lives on board on each aircraft.
High in the skies is Cathay Pacific Flight 407. It's en route to Hong Kong from Taiwan. On board are over 200 passengers who will shortly join the 37 million other passengers who pass through Hong Kong Airport every year. Their lives are in the hands of the air traffic controllers, who must ensure the safe takeoff and landing of every plane at Hong Kong.
Air Macau 661, roger. Contact departure 123.8. Good day.
In front of each controller is a radar screen, a two-dimensional picture of the skies above them. Despite all the technology around them, they still rely on batons to help them complete the job. They may be low-tech, but they're the fail-safe system in case the computers crash. The controllers have to think bigger than 2D. They have to juggle distance, space, and time as they translate the blips on their screen into a mental image. Back in the skies, Flight 407 is getting closer to its destination. Approximately 200 miles from Hong Kong Airport, it makes its first contact with air traffic control.
Cathay 407, Hong Kong radar, good morning, identified. Clear Yamato 1 Alpha arrival, runway 07 left, cancel speed restriction at Malin.
Now, a relay race of command springs into operation. It begins with the windowless bunker of the Air Traffic Control Center. Here, the central controller is the first person the pilot speaks to. He directs the plane towards the airport, merging all descending aircraft into a single file as they approach.
My responsibility is to bring the aircraft from each entry point from adjacent airspace to integrate into a stream and to hand off to the approach suite in the proper sequence and spacing.
The controller instructs the pilot on speed, altitude, and weather. If the airport is too busy, he can put the aircraft into a holding pattern until space is available. Once Flight 707's landing slot is clear, the central controller's job is complete. Around 40 miles from the airport, he hands over to the approach controller.
As the area controller pass me the aircraft, the Cathay 407, I take the Cathay 407 to a lower level. And on the other hand, there are lots of Hong Kong departure coming through the airspace. I need to separate those departure aircraft with the arrival aircraft.
As the plane nears the airport, the gap between it and the plane in front narrows. Now they're separated by just over 2 miles. It may seem a lot, but they're actually just 15 to 20 seconds apart, so each decision by the controller becomes ever more crucial. The approach controller uses a radar approach system that displays the flight number, speed, altitude, and carrier.
Cathay 407, right.
As soon as the plane has safely made it to within 40 kilometers of the airport, the radar screen flashes green. The next stage of the journey is about to begin. Now the flight is passed from the windowless control room to the control tower.
As a tower controller, basically we receive the plane at about 8 nautical miles from the aerodrome, and we talk to them, giving a landing clearance on the runway, and then we will pass it on. And once they vacate the runway, we will pass it on to the ground controller.
With every moment and decision now critical, the tower controller has an additional piece of equipment to help her, her eyes.
Seeing out windows improve my reaction, and of course it's an enjoyment too. It's just all about the job, looking out at the window, looking at the aeroplane, looking at the weather.
Flight 407 makes its final approach. As soon as the plane touches down, the ground controller takes over. The final leg of the relay is just as vital as any of the others. The world's worst aircraft disaster back in 1977 didn't happen in the skies. It happened on the ground, when 2 jumbo jets collided at Tenerife Airport, killing almost 600 passengers.
As a ground movement controller, my duties are to move aircraft along the taxiways to the parking stands, or on the other way, move the aircraft from the parking stands, start up to take off in the runway, and over to the control tower.
Now that Flight 407 has landed safely, its passengers gather their luggage and go their own ways. But for the air traffic controllers, the whole process never stops, as they juggle more approaching and departing aircraft and continue to play a vital but rarely seen role in speeding you safely to your destination. Behind the ordinary things that surround us in our daily lives are miraculous advances in engineering, which we rarely get to see. Ingenious solutions to problems most of us never knew existed. Since this program began, the mining trucks at Mount Arthur have shifted over 8,000 tons of coal. Over 20,000 items of flat-pack furniture have been assembled, and 3,000 passengers have landed safely at Hong Kong Airport. Even the most ordinary objects have an extraordinary story to tell. We only have to watch and listen.
接下来，从太空船到下水道，从天空到海底，为您揭晓10大最佳运输工具排行榜。超萌机器王接着播出。